My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Star Wars has been one of the biggest franchises in history. Doesn't matter who you are, we have loved many of these films. At least it used to be the biggest franchise in history. Ever since Disney bought Lucasfilm, the franchise has become completely irrelevant. And it brings me no joy to say that, as a pretty casual Star Wars fan, but I grew up loving this IP. But I am just done with this franchise. Star Wars has never been in a worse place than it is right now. There is simply no denying it. And I was hoping they could get things back on track. But things have essentially gone worse. The Acolyte released a while ago and the show just couldn't hook me in. I only saw the first episode and it was fine, I guess. That is how I knew the show completely failed. Like, I'm sorry, if you can't hook me in from the first episode, you lost me for the entire show. Like, I don't hate watch, so I stopped. And I literally thought to myself this show was gonna go off the rails, and I was right. And recently the Acolyte was cancelled and I'm not surprised at all. With some people loving it and others saying it was one of the worst things ever with Star Wars. With review bombs, which is just pathetic, but the viewership was getting worse and worse, so I'm not surprised it was cancelled. And while the show was premiering, I came to a realization. Star Wars needs to move on. It needs to stop. This franchise genuinely has nothing going for it right now. It needs to end. Instead of bringing people movies and shows that no one wants and won't do well anyway, I think they should take a page from DC and hit a reset button of some kind. Now, I am not saying to reboot the Skywalker saga. That would be a massive cash grab. And I remember thinking of a reboot and thinking how stupid that it was. But after all the things Disney has done, I think it might be the best option for this franchise to have a future. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't hate everything Disney has done with Star Wars. Not everything has been bad. I would be lying if I said that. I'm not gonna just shit on how everything bad has been, cause that's just not the case. And if you guys love the products Disney Star Wars has done, good for you. I wish I felt that way. But I am just so done with Star Wars, and I have never been more disappointed than I am right now. So let's stop the rambling, and let's get right into it. So Kathleen Kennedy has basically been the Kevin Feige of Star Wars. Now, I don't hate her like a lot of people do. Love her or hate her, she is a great producer. She has been involved in some of the greatest films of all time, some of my personal favorites. Even Steven Spielberg himself has called her the greatest producer of all time, and to a certain extent, I agree. But being a great producer isn't the same as being a great studio head. She has done some great things for this IP, such as Rogue One, Andor, and the first 2 seasons of Mando, but that's about it. Ever since George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, it has felt like Star Wars has been throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. Take the sequel trilogy as a perfect example. When The Force Awakens came out, it was actually really good and still is in my opinion. Now I know The Force Awakens soured on some people over time, but I still think it's a pretty good film. Was it similar to New Hope? Yes, but that was the point. It was supposed to reintroduce audiences to Star Wars, as at this point the last Star Wars movie was 10 years ago, that being Revenge of the Sith. It introduced us to some interesting characters like Kylo Ren, who still remains my favorite character from the sequel trilogy. Him knowing he cannot live up to Darth Vader was such a great idea. Let's be real, we all know you can never top Darth Vader, that is impossible. So the fact they gave him that very same dilemma was a really interesting approach. Now, I know Rey and Finn were done dirty in this trilogy, but in this film specifically, I do really like them. And I remember seeing Finn specifically and just being so excited to see where this character goes. And was left super disappointed with John Boyega just yelling Rey. But then we had The Last Jedi and it split the fandom apart. Some people calling it a masterpiece, others saying it was the worst thing to happen to Star Wars. I'm in the middle on this one. Like, I don't hate this, but I have a lot of problems with it. Specifically, what they did to Luke. Doing the classic Hollywood thing of bringing back the iconic character to make the female character look better. Like, Luke here just makes no sense. How does he go from a peaceful Jedi to abandoning everything he stand for to drink milk from whatever that thing was? I don't even care at this point. The Canto Bight stuff was also terrible, and that shirtless Kylo Ren scene was pretty weird, but it did have moments of greatness. Like, this film isn't terrible. Well, it's far from that, but my biggest problem with this film is that they abandoned key plot points and character development from The Force Awakens. In the context of the trilogy, it makes absolutely no sense. Then there was The Rise of Skywalker. This film ages worse and worse the more I think about it. I cannot stand this film. I hate this film so much, like, you guys have no idea, or maybe you do, who knows. I remember being a few days late to see this movie, and then when I finally went to go see it, I finished it, and I thought to myself, I don't know how to feel about this. Now, for context here, when I think about that to myself, that means I didn't like the movie. And I rarely think that when I'm in the theater. This film is everything wrong with Star Wars today. In an attempt to course correct to fix what people didn't like about The Last Jedi, in the process, it also pissed off people who actually liked The Last Jedi. Instead of giving us a satisfying conclusion, it just gave us a nostalgia bait, lazy and pathetic attempt to end this trilogy. They clearly had no plan with this trilogy. There is a reason why we haven't had a Star Wars movie in 5 years. The sequel trilogy is the reason. Like, bringing back Palpatine has to be the cheapest move I have ever seen from a big Hollywood franchise. They knew this movie was bad. They just decided, let's just fan service our way to victory. And the most frustrating part of that part is, it worked. Like, when you mess up a trilogy this bad, that should cause serious alarm bells. And this speaks to my biggest point here. Kathleen Kennedy needs to go. She is a great producer, but it is clear she has absolutely no idea what to do with this franchise. Multiple projects being developed get cancelled like it was nothing, and others that shouldn't even exist in the first place. It's clear how much of a disconnect Kennedy has with fans and audiences. And given how bad the state of Star Wars is, I would be surprised if she even gets another tenure. One of the worst parts about modern Star Wars is that they refuse to let the past die. Despite doing new things, it still feels like they just can't let go of the past. Take Book of Boba Fett as a prime example. Now, this is not a good show by any means, but the fact you needed Mando, Ahsoka, and Luke Skywalker to appear to make it good is all you need to know. Star Wars has a clear problem when it comes to cameos. Now, if you've seen my MCU videos, you know it's not just a Star Wars problem. The MCU has the same problem. Now, I know I say over and over again that Marvel also has a nostalgia problem, but Star Wars is way, way worse. At least when Marvel does it, most of the time it actually makes sense. Star Wars just does cheap cameos for nostalgia to make you forget how bad the show or film actually is. And even on Book of Boba Fett, Tamara Morrison himself said he was not happy with how Boba Fett was handled. And easily the thing that made me just give up on Star Wars as a whole is Obi-Wan, which also tells me they can't let go. Now, even though I'm a casual Star Wars fan, I love Obi-Wan Kenobi. He is like a top 3 Star Wars character. The return of Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen promising a so-called rematch of the century, and it's mid at best. It's not terrible, like when it's focusing on Obi-Wan's PTSD, Vader's trauma, and their interactions, it was great. but the writing and the direction was just so bad. Bringing in someone who was clearly incapable for the job, and a writer who admitted to having limited Star Wars knowledge. With the show's main focus being a character who is so annoying. Basically being the second Jedi sister from Fallen Order, just less interesting. Overall, it was a complete letdown for me and a lot of people. Like, if you can't get Obi-Wan and Darth Vader right, what can you get right? Now on the other hand, we had Andor, and it was fantastic. Just taking its time and letting the story and the characters take the stage. It had no problem with reliance on past characters. This show has the best characters, story, writing, and dialogue. It's not even close. This makes the rest of the Star Wars shows look pathetic compared to Andor. But the problem was, not a lot of people saw it. Like, when something this great comes out and no one watches it, that's a huge problem. A lot of people I know adore this show, but I always see people calling it boring or slow. And that's a problem because Disney has just turned Star Wars into this cameo machine. Even in the good projects like Mando Season 2, there are cameos. But at least there, it actually made sense. Luke and Ahsoka didn't feel unnecessary and the season was really good. But then Season 3 came around and just had the same thing, but with no reason. Like, I can't take Jack Black and Lizzo seriously, it's a big joke. Now I know we had Ahsoka, but I never saw that and probably never will. I know people love this character, but like I said, I'm a casual Star Wars fan. Then we had The Acolyte, and not gonna spend too much time with this one because I didn't finish it. But my biggest problem with it, from what I saw, is the runtime. The show cost around $180 million, with episodes that are of length of sitcom television, which is pathetic. Now, it's a Disney Plus problem in general because they feel like stretched out movies. The only shows I actually like there are X-Men 97, Loki, and Andor. That is it. It is easily the most disappointing streaming service out there. The Acolyte, from what I saw on the internet, is that Yoda and someone else appeared. Like I said, I don't know. Casual Star Wars fan, I'm not gonna try and guess it. But the fact Disney can't even come up with anything new these days is kinda sad. It feels like we are just gonna be stuck with this whole cameo simulator for the next few years. Instead of telling a good story, let's just roll out the cameos to make a quick buck. Like, that's so sad. Star Wars seriously needs to let go of the past, because the nostalgia bait just isn't working. So as you can tell, the past few years of Star Wars has been a complete and utter mess. Like, you know how some people don't care about DC movies and to a certain extent Marvel movies, is how I feel about Star Wars right now. And that brings me to the reason I even made this video in the first place. Star Wars needs to restart. Now, I'm not saying like reboot the Skywalker saga. Like I said, that would be stupid and desperate and you would have people fuming. I just think a reset is necessary right now. Just go in a new direction with new stories, similar to what DC is doing. Over at DC, it was known for years that things weren't working, and last year proved that. It was time to move away from the DCEU. They needed a change in personnel and a fresh new direction. So what did they do? They hit the reset button, and now people are actually excited instead of a new release just being there. And I and many others have not been this excited for the future of DC in a long time because of the reset. And I think Star Wars should do the same thing. It needs a fresh direction of some kind. Like, we have the Mando movie, which is a clear, desperate attempt to get a movie out, let's be real. And don't even get me started on the Rey movie. Like, the fact this even exists is so stupid. Bringing back one of the most divisive Star Wars characters is such a bad idea. And the director doesn't make it any better, because she has never done a feature film. The best she has under her belt is a documentary and a few episodes of TV. Now, that always worries me in general, like when someone has no experience on feature films and taking on a big project as their first thing, it really worries me. Such as what happened with X-Men Dark Phoenix, or even now with DC with Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. If you guys don't know, the writer of Supergirl only did a short film, so no experience, that makes me a little worried. And the director clearly has a lot of ego, so a part of me is also worried that she is doing this to push an agenda over telling a good story. Now, I do actually have a lot of faith in the writer, Stephen Knight, who wrote Peaky Blinders, which is probably my favorite show of all time. I love that show, and the writing is just, like, fantastic. Knight knows how to write morally complex characters and interesting characters as a whole, so I have a lot of faith in him, but that's it. Like, divisive movies don't go well. Just look at the Suicide Squad or the Marvels. The direction of this IP is just not working. It needs a fresh, new direction if this IP is gonna succeed. And if you still want to do some of the movies still in development, you can still do those, such as James Mangold's or Sean Levy's films, just to name a few. But to close it all up, Star Wars is in a desperate need for a reset of some sorts. Whether it's a reboot of some kind that doesn't mess with what came before, or just a new direction in general. Because Disney's direction with Star Wars is just not working. They need a new head to take over, let the past die, and just restart with a blank slate.